Sarah Martinez wiped the sweat from her forehead as she adjusted her tactical vest one more time. The desert heat was already unbearable at 6 in the morning, and she knew it would only get worse as the day progressed. At 23, she was the youngest member of Alpha Squad, fresh out of the police academy with barely 6 months of field experience under her belt. "Martinez, you ready for this?" called out Detective Rick Barnes, a 15-year veteran who had seen more action than most soldiers. His weathered face showed concern as he watched the rookie check her equipment for the third time. Sarah nodded, trying to project confidence she didn't entirely feel. This was her first major operation since joining the Special Tactical Unit. Intelligence reports indicated that a heavily armed drug cartel had established a compound in the remote desert area, approximately 40 miles outside the city. The operation was supposed to be routine surveillance and reconnaissance only. Captain James Morrison gathered the team around the tactical vehicle. His stern expression left no room for doubt about the seriousness of their mission. "Listen up, people. We've got reliable intel that the Vega cartel is using this location as a major distribution hub. Our job is to assess the situation and report back. This is not an assault mission." The team consisted of 8 experienced officers and Sarah. Each member had been handpicked for their expertise, except for Sarah, who had been assigned to the unit as part of her field training rotation. Some of the older officers had expressed doubts about bringing a rookie on such a sensitive mission, but Captain Morrison had insisted that real-world experience was the only way to properly train new officers. As they loaded into the armored vehicles, Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness coursing through her veins. She had dreamed of moments like this during her academy training, the chance to make a real difference in fighting organized crime. Her instructors had always praised her tactical awareness and quick decision-making abilities, but she had never been tested in a real combat situation. The convoy moved through the desert terrain for over an hour, following barely visible dirt roads that seemed to lead nowhere. The landscape was harsh and unforgiving, with jagged rocks and sparse vegetation providing little cover. Sarah studied the terrain maps, memorizing every detail that might be important later. Detective Maria Gonzalez, who sat across from Sarah in the vehicle, noticed her intense focus. "First time this far out in the desert?" she asked with a friendly smile. "Yes, ma'am. I grew up in the city. This is completely different from anything I've experienced," Sarah replied honestly. "The desert can be deceiving," Gonzalez explained. "It looks empty and harmless, but it can turn deadly very quickly. Temperature extremes, wildlife, and limited visibility can all work against you. Always respect the environment out here." As they approached the target area, Captain Morrison's voice crackled through the radio. "All units, we're 2 miles from the designated observation point. Prepare for dismount. Remember, this is recon only. We observe, document, and report back." The vehicles stopped in a natural depression that provided concealment from the target location. The team quickly established a temporary command post, setting up communication equipment and surveillance gear. Sarah was assigned to work with Sergeant Tom Williams, an experienced surveillance specialist who had volunteered to mentor the rookie. "Your job is to watch and learn," Williams told her as they set up their observation equipment. "Keep your eyes open, stay quiet, and follow my lead. We're looking for personnel counts, vehicle movements, defensive positions, and any intelligence that might be useful for future operations." Through their high-powered scopes, they could see the compound clearly. It was larger and more sophisticated than the intelligence reports had suggested. Multiple buildings were connected by covered walkways, and there were obvious defensive positions strategically placed around the perimeter. Armed guards patrolled regularly, and several vehicles were parked in organized formations. "This isn't just a distribution hub," Williams whispered to Sarah. "This looks like a major operational base. We need to document everything we can see." For the next 3 hours, the team methodically recorded their observations. Sarah proved to be an excellent spotter, identifying details that others had missed. She noticed communication equipment on several rooftops, counted the number of guards and their rotation patterns, and even spotted what appeared to be heavy weapons positions. Captain Morrison reviewed their findings with growing concern. The intelligence they had received was clearly incomplete or outdated. Instead of a simple drug distribution point, they were looking at a heavily fortified compound that could house dozens of armed cartel members. "We need to report this back to headquarters immediately," he told his team. "This changes everything about how we approach this target." As the team prepared to pack up their equipment and return to base, Sarah noticed something through her scope that made her blood run cold. A convoy of vehicles was approaching the compound from the east, vehicles that looked remarkably similar to the ones used by local law enforcement. "Sergeant Williams," she whispered urgently, "we may have a problem." Williams quickly focused his scope in the direction Sarah was indicating. What he saw confirmed his worst fears. The approaching convoy consisted of 3 black SUVs with government license plates, exactly like the vehicles used by federal drug enforcement agencies. "Captain, we've got incoming federal vehicles approaching the compound," Williams reported over the radio. Captain Morrison quickly moved to their position and confirmed the sighting through his own scope. "This can't be a coincidence. Either we've stumbled into a federal operation, or we've got a much bigger problem." The tension in the temporary command post became palpable as everyone realized the implications. If federal agents were arriving at the compound, it could mean that their local operation had been compromised. Alternatively, it could indicate corruption at higher levels of law enforcement. As they watched, the federal vehicles were allowed to enter the compound without any resistance from the guards. The occupants were greeted like expected guests rather than law enforcement conducting a raid. Several men in expensive suits emerged from the vehicles and were escorted into the main building. "We need to get out of here now," Captain Morrison ordered. "Something is very wrong with this situation." But, as the team began hastily packing their equipment, Sarah spotted something that made her stomach drop. Through her scope, she could see one of the men from the federal vehicles pointing directly toward their observation position. He was holding what appeared to be a radio and was clearly communicating with someone. "Captain, I think we've been made," she reported, trying to keep the fear out of her voice. Morrison quickly confirmed her observation and immediately ordered an emergency withdrawal. "All units, pack it up now. We're blown and need to move immediately." The team worked frantically to gather their equipment and prepare for departure. But, as they reached their vehicles, they discovered that all 4 tires on each vehicle had been slashed. Someone had found their position and deliberately sabotaged their transportation. "We're on foot from here," Morrison announced grimly. "Emergency protocols are now in effect. We need to reach the backup extraction point 15 miles to the south." As the team prepared for what would be a dangerous trek across hostile desert terrain, Sarah realized that her first major operation had turned into something far more deadly than anyone had anticipated. The rookie who had been so excited about making a difference in fighting crime now found herself in a situation where survival itself was uncertain. The sun was climbing higher in the sky, and the temperature was already approaching dangerous levels. With limited water supplies and no vehicular support, the team would have to rely on their training, teamwork, and determination to reach safety. For Sarah, this was no longer about proving herself as a capable officer, it was about staying alive long enough to report what they had discovered. As they began their march across the unforgiving desert landscape, none of them realized that their ordeal was just beginning. The corruption they had uncovered ran deeper than any of them could have imagined, and someone was determined to ensure that their discovery never reached the outside world. The desert sun beat down mercilessly on the 9-member team as they made their way across the rocky terrain. Sarah's tactical boots were already rubbing against her heels, creating painful blisters that she tried to ignore. Captain Morrison had set a brutal pace, knowing that every minute they remained in the open increased their chances of being caught. Detective Barnes carried the team's radio equipment, desperately trying to establish contact with headquarters. Every attempt resulted in the same frustrating static. "Someone's jamming our communications," he reported to Morrison. "We're completely cut off." The realization sent a chill through the team despite the scorching heat. Professional signal jamming equipment wasn't something the local cartel would typically possess. It suggested a level of sophistication and preparation that indicated they had walked into a carefully planned trap. Sergeant Williams, who had been monitoring their rear, suddenly held up his hand for the team to stop. In the distance, they could hear the sound of helicopter rotors approaching. Everyone immediately sought whatever cover they could find among the sparse desert vegetation and rocky outcroppings. "That's not one of ours," Morrison whispered as the aircraft came into view. The black helicopters circled their last known position before beginning a methodical search pattern. It was clearly equipped with thermal imaging equipment, as evidenced by its systematic sweeping movements. Sarah pressed herself against a large boulder, trying to make herself as small as possible. Her heart pounded so loudly she was certain it could be heard over the helicopter noise. This was nothing like the scenarios they had practiced during training. The reality of being hunted was terrifying in ways that no simulation could replicate. The helicopter made 3 passes over their area before moving on to search other sections of the desert. After waiting an additional 10 minutes to ensure it wasn't returning, Morrison signaled for the team to continue moving. They had lost precious time, and the delay would make their journey even more challenging. As they continued their trek, Detective Gonzalez began showing signs of heat exhaustion. Despite her experience, the combination of stress, extreme temperature, and physical exertion was taking its toll. She stumbled several times, and her breathing became increasingly labored. "We need to find shade and rest," Williams urged Morrison. "Gonzalez needs medical attention, and the rest of us aren't far behind." Morrison scanned the horizon, looking for any natural shelter that might provide relief from the relentless sun. In the distance, he spotted what appeared to be a small canyon that might offer some protection. "There," he pointed. "We make for that canyon and reassess our situation." The canyon provided blessed relief from the direct sunlight, and the team immediately took advantage of the cooler temperatures. Sarah helped Gonzalez into a comfortable position while Barnes distributed small amounts of water from their limited supply. Everyone knew they had to ration carefully, they still had many miles to cover. While the team rested, Morrison and Williams discussed their options. The backup extraction point was still more than 10 miles away, and they had no way of knowing if it was even safe to use. For all they knew, their entire operation had been compromised from the beginning. "I think we need to consider the possibility that someone on the inside set us up," Williams said quietly. "The timing of everything, the federal vehicles, the sabotage trucks, the jamming equipment, it's too coordinated to be coincidental." Morrison nodded grimly. "I've been thinking the same thing. The question is, who do we trust when we get back? If there's a leak in the department, reporting through normal channels could get us all killed." Sarah, who had been listening to their conversation, spoke up for the first time since their ordeal began. "Captain, I may have an idea. Before joining the tactical unit, I worked with internal affairs on a small corruption investigation. There might be someone there we can trust." Both senior officers looked at her with surprise. They had assumed she was just another rookie with limited experience, but her background in internal affairs changed things significantly. "Tell us more," Morrison said. "Lieutenant Jennifer Walsh runs a special investigation unit that operates independently from normal departmental oversight," Sarah explained. "She specifically investigates corruption within law enforcement. If anyone would be safe to contact, it would be her." Williams considered this information carefully. "The problem is reaching her without going through compromised communication channels. We need to assume that anyone monitoring our radio traffic also has access to our phone communications." As they discussed their limited options, the sound of approaching vehicles echoed through the canyon. The team quickly took defensive positions, weapons ready, as 3 pickup trucks loaded with armed men came into view at the canyon entrance. "Federal agents," the lead man called out. "We're here to assist with your extraction." Sarah immediately noticed something wrong with the situation. The men were dressed in tactical gear that didn't match standard federal agency protocols, and their vehicles were civilian models rather than government-issued equipment. She quietly alerted Morrison to her concerns. "Show us your identification," Morrison called back, buying time to assess the situation. Instead of complying with the reasonable request, the men began spreading out in a tactical formation that suggested hostile intent rather than a rescue operation. It was clear that these were not legitimate federal agents, but rather members of the cartel sent to eliminate witnesses. "Take cover!" Morrison shouted as the first shots rang out. The narrow canyon that had provided relief from the heat suddenly became a trap as bullets ricocheted off the rock walls. The team returned fire while seeking better defensive positions deeper in the canyon. Sarah found herself separated from the main group, pinned down behind a small ledge with only Detective Barnes for company. "We can't stay here," Barnes told her during a brief lull in the gunfire. "They'll eventually flank us and we'll be sitting ducks." Sarah studied the canyon walls, looking for any possible escape route. Her academy training in tactical movement was about to be put to the ultimate test. She spotted a narrow passage that led up the canyon wall. It would be dangerous to attempt, but it might provide a way to get above their attackers. "Cover me," she told Barnes. "I'm going to try to reach that passage and get a better position." Before Barnes could object, Sarah was already moving. She sprinted across open ground while bullets whined around her, diving and rolling to avoid the incoming fire. Her athletic ability and small size worked in her favor as she managed to reach the passage without being hit. The climb up the narrow passage was treacherous, with loose rock threatening to send her tumbling back down at any moment. But Sarah's determination drove her forward, ignoring the cuts and bruises as she clawed her way up the canyon wall. Behind her, she could hear the gunfight continuing to rage. When she finally reached a position above the attackers, Sarah could see the entire tactical situation clearly. Her team was outnumbered and outgunned, trapped in defensive positions with limited ammunition. But, from her elevated position, she had a clear view of the attackers' positions. Using her sniper training from the academy, Sarah began systematically targeting the cartel members who posed the greatest threat to her teammates. Her accurate fire forced them to take cover and disrupted their coordinated assault. For the first time since the firefight began, her team had breathing room to improve their positions. Captain Morrison, recognizing the advantage Sarah had created, organized a tactical withdrawal deeper into the canyon system. The team moved in coordinated bounds, with Sarah providing overwatch from her elevated position. Her cover fire allowed them to reach a more defensible location where the narrow canyon entrance limited how many attackers could advance simultaneously. But, as the immediate tactical situation improved, Sarah realized they were still trapped in a larger sense. The cartel members could simply wait them out, knowing that the police team had limited water and ammunition. Eventually, heat, thirst, and exhaustion would force them into surrender or desperate action. As if reading her thoughts, she heard additional vehicles arriving at the canyon entrance. Through her scope, she could see that reinforcements were arriving, more armed men with heavier weapons, including what appeared to be military-grade assault rifles. The situation was rapidly becoming hopeless. During another brief lull in the fighting, Sarah heard Morrison's voice calling up to her position. "Martinez, can you see any other way out of this canyon?" She studied the surrounding terrain carefully, looking for any possibility they might have missed. The canyon system was more extensive than it had initially appeared, with several branches leading in different directions. One passage seemed to wind back toward the east, potentially offering an escape route. "There might be a way," she called back. "But it would mean abandoning our current position and moving deeper into unknown territory." The decision was taken out of their hands when the cartel members began using grenades to flush them out of their defensive positions. The explosions in the confined space were deafening and disorienting, filling the air with dust and rock fragments that made breathing difficult. "We move now," Morrison ordered. The team began a fighting withdrawal through the canyon system, with Sarah continuing to provide cover from elevated positions when possible. The narrow passages that had initially trapped them now worked in their favor, preventing the attackers from bringing their superior numbers to bear effectively. As they moved deeper into the canyon system, Sarah began to notice signs that they weren't the first people to use this route. There were old campfire remains, discarded equipment, and even some carved markings on the rock walls. This area had been used by someone else, possibly drug smugglers or other criminals familiar with the terrain. The realization gave her hope that the passage might actually lead somewhere useful rather than simply deeper into the wilderness. But it also raised new concerns about what other dangers they might encounter in this remote and lawless area. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Sarah knew their ordeal was far from over. They had managed to escape the immediate trap, but they were still lost in hostile territory with enemies actively hunting them. The rookie cop who had started the day excited about her first major operation now found herself fighting for survival in a situation that grew more desperate with each passing hour. The canyon passage led them deeper into the desert wilderness than any of them had expected. As darkness began to fall, the temperature dropped rapidly, creating a new set of challenges for the already exhausted team. Sarah's uniform was soaked with sweat that now turned cold against her skin, making her shiver uncontrollably. Captain Morrison called for another brief halt to assess their situation. The team had been moving for over 8 hours with minimal rest and water. Detective Gonzalez was barely conscious, supported between 2 other officers. Detective Barnes had taken a bullet graze to his shoulder during the canyon firefight and was losing blood despite their field dressing efforts. "We can't continue like this," Sergeant Williams told Morrison quietly. "We're going to start losing people to exhaustion and exposure." Sarah overheard their conversation and realized that difficult decisions would have to be made soon. In her academy training, they had covered triage situations where not everyone could be saved, but the reality of potentially leaving teammates behind was heartbreaking. Looking around at the faces of her colleagues, Sarah saw the same determination that had made her want to become a police officer in the first place. These people had dedicated their lives to protecting others, and now they were trapped in a situation where their own survival was uncertain. "Captain," she said, approaching Morrison despite her junior rank, "I've been thinking about our situation. The people who set this trap know our protocols, our equipment, and probably our backup extraction points. But they don't know me as well as they know the rest of you." Morrison studied her face in the dim light. "What are you suggesting, Martinez?" "I'm suggesting that I continue alone to reach help while the team finds a defensible position to wait for rescue. I'm the smallest, fastest, and, honestly, the least important person here in terms of operational knowledge." The suggestion was met with immediate resistance from several team members. "Absolutely not," Williams said firmly. "We don't leave people behind, especially rookies." But Sarah had already thought through the logic of her proposal. "Sir, with respect, I'm not talking about being left behind. I'm talking about being the one who gets help for everyone else. I have the best chance of moving undetected, and if something happens to me, the team still has its experienced leadership intact." Detective Barnes, despite his injury, supported Sarah's assessment. "The kid's right about the tactical situation. Someone needs to reach the outside world and report what we've discovered. If we all stay together, we're all at risk of being captured or killed." Morrison was torn between his responsibility to protect his team members and the logical necessity of getting word to the outside world about the corruption they had uncovered. The information they carried could prevent other law enforcement personnel from walking into similar traps. As they debated their options, the sound of distant helicopter rotors reminded them that time was running out. Their pursuers were still actively searching for them, using sophisticated equipment that would eventually locate their position. "All right, Martinez," Morrison finally decided. "But you don't go alone. Williams, you go with her. The rest of us will find a place to hole up and wait for rescue." Sarah wanted to argue that splitting the group further reduced everyone's chances, but she recognized that Morrison had made his decision as both a commander and a father figure trying to protect his people. Williams quickly gathered minimal supplies, water, first aid kit, and emergency communication equipment. The goodbyes were brief but emotional. Each team member knew they might not see each other again. Detective Gonzalez, despite her weakened condition, pressed a small photograph into Sarah's hand. "My daughter," she whispered. "Make sure someone tells her I was doing my job." Sarah and Williams left the main group as the first stars became visible in the clear desert sky. The temperature continued to drop, and their breath became visible in small puffs of vapor. Navigation would be challenging without landmarks, relying on Williams' experience and Sarah's instinct for direction. They moved as quickly as possible while maintaining stealth, knowing that thermal imaging equipment could detect their body heat from a significant distance. Williams led them through washes and behind rock formations that might mask their heat signature from aerial surveillance. After several hours of travel, they came across an abandoned mining camp that appeared to have been in use for decades. The structures were mostly collapsed, but one small building still had an intact roof that could provide shelter and concealment. "We rest here for 2 hours," Williams decided. "Then, we continue before dawn when thermal imaging is most effective." Inside the shelter, Sarah finally had a moment to process everything that had happened. 24 hours ago, she had been a rookie officer excited about her first major operation. Now she was one of only 2 people who might survive to report a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of law enforcement. Williams seemed to sense her emotional state. "You've done good work today, Martinez. Better than most veterans would have managed under these circumstances." "I just keep thinking about the others," she replied. "Detective Gonzalez, Captain Morrison, all of them. They're counting on us to get help." "And we will," Williams assured her. "But you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that when we do get help, some of those people might not be who they claim to be. This corruption runs deep, and we don't know how far it extends." As they prepared to resume their journey, Williams shared intelligence he had been keeping to himself. "I recognized one of the men who showed up at the compound today. Assistant Director Marcus Thompson from the DEA. I worked with him on a task force 3 years ago." The revelation sent chills down Sarah's spine. If a high-ranking DEA official was involved with the cartel, it explained how their operation had been compromised so completely. It also meant that standard law enforcement channels were definitely not safe for reporting their discoveries. They continued their trek through the pre-dawn darkness, guided by stars and Williams' compass. The desert terrain seemed endless, with one ridge looking exactly like the next. Sarah's feet were raw with blisters, and her water supply was running dangerously low. As the sun began to rise, they finally saw signs of civilization in the distance, a highway with occasional traffic. But Williams cautioned against immediate relief. "We need to be careful about who we approach. Anyone could be part of this conspiracy." They waited in concealment near the highway, observing the traffic patterns and looking for someone who appeared to be an ordinary civilian rather than law enforcement or government personnel. After an hour of waiting, a family in a minivan with out-of-state license plates pulled over for what appeared to be a routine rest stop. Williams made the decision to approach them. "Federal agents," he called out, showing his badge. "We need emergency assistance to contact our headquarters." The family was initially frightened but became cooperative when Williams explained they had been involved in an operation that went wrong and needed to contact their superiors. The father allowed Williams to use his cell phone while keeping his family at a safe distance. Instead of calling the department directly, Williams contacted Lieutenant Jennifer Walsh, the internal affairs investigator Sarah had mentioned. Walsh listened to Williams' brief report with growing alarm and immediately began coordinating an independent response. "Do not contact anyone else in the department," Walsh instructed. "I'm sending a team that I personally trust to your location. Give me GPS coordinates and find a secure place to wait." While they waited for rescue, Sarah reflected on how much she had changed in the span of a single day. The eager rookie who had reported for duty that morning was gone, replaced by someone who had seen the brutal realities of corruption and violence. When Walsh's team arrived, they brought disturbing news. Radio intercepts had indicated that their teammate's position had been discovered during the night. A massive firefight had occurred, but the outcome was unknown. Search and rescue operations were already underway, but the situation was complicated by the need to exclude potentially compromised personnel. 3 days later, Sarah stood in a secure conference room at the FBI field office, giving her testimony to a joint task force investigating the corruption scandal. She was the sole survivor of Alpha Squad. The others had been found dead at their defensive position, apparently killed after putting up fierce resistance. The investigation that followed Sarah's testimony uncovered a conspiracy involving millions of dollars in drug money and corruption that reached into multiple federal agencies. Assistant Director Thompson and 12 other officials were eventually arrested and prosecuted. The cartel's desert operation was dismantled, but not before several other law enforcement operations were compromised. Sarah received numerous commendations for her bravery and tactical excellence under extreme circumstances. She was offered positions with several federal agencies and special law enforcement units. But the experience had changed her perspective on what kind of career she wanted. Instead of seeking glory or advancement, Sarah requested assignment to Internal Affairs, working with Lieutenant Walsh to investigate corruption within law enforcement. She had learned that the greatest threats to public safety sometimes came from within the very institutions sworn to protect society. The rookie who had been thrown into a kill zone had indeed come back alone, but she had brought with her the evidence needed to prevent other officers from suffering the same fate. Her survival had not been just a matter of luck or training, it had been a testament to the courage and determination that defines the best of law enforcement. Years later, Sarah would often think about her fallen teammates and the sacrifice they made to protect the integrity of their profession. Their deaths had not been in vain if the corruption they died fighting was eliminated and other officers were saved from similar betrayal. The desert had tested Sarah in ways that no training could prepare someone for, but she had emerged stronger and more committed to the ideals of justice that had originally drawn her to law enforcement. She had learned that being a good police officer meant being willing to fight corruption wherever it was found, even when that meant standing alone against overwhelming odds.